Another area that I really want to explore with you both was around best practices. The first being around sort of like the KPIs that you should monitor, obsess over as you grow and scale. Michael, if we can start with you with the North American market and the solo and smaller firms, that'd be great. And then Joe, if you could tell us a little bit more about smaller to the more boutique size firms, that'd be perfect too.
Sure.
Yeah. So we're talking KPIs. This, of course, their utilization is one that many firms should be paying attention to. Although I would say, if you are under 10, 15 people, that's probably not going to be where you're going to spend too much time, just because you already have pretty good visibility into the smaller number of people that you're working with and how to kind of allocate that time and make sure that you have the capacity and plan for that. I think one of the most important metrics for organizations right now, and even for smaller firms, is around margin and profitability. And so I look at that in two ways that are key. One is the profitability of your clients. An example of that is, we spoke with one client recently who, the majority of their business, they didn't realize this initially, but the majority of their business was coming from a very specific type of client, yet their marketing, their messaging was being cast quite broadly to all different types of clients that they were working with. But as they did an analysis of their client profitability, they saw that, in fact, it was larger clients that were really adding up to the vast majority of their profitability and the revenue inside of the business. And so with that insight, they're able to shift their messaging, shift their targeting, shift their content development to really just speak specifically to that ideal client. So that's on the client profitability side. And then the other one is project profitability. So really looking at, not all projects, not all services are created equal. And it's not uncommon for organizations or firms to take on projects that might feel like big projects, and the revenue from that might be quite large, but the profitability ends up being almost nothing. And so you might just be kind of running around with like a chicken with its head cut off, not really, allocating appropriately. And so I think running the analysis of both client profitability and project profitability is something that all firms should be doing. And it becomes especially important in times like these, where your focus should not just be on top line revenue; it should really be on margin and profitability. So those are a couple. I'm happy to go into more, Ben, but I'll pass over to Joe maybe, and he can share some thoughts as well.
Thanks, Michael. Okay, so I tend to deal with firms which are between, I guess, 20 to 150 employees. So tend to be slightly bigger, and you've actually got a couple of S curves in that process. And there's a couple of things I wanted to say about KPIs before I start detailing the ones that, because number one is a lot of people, you need to measure stuff according to your size. There's no point trying to measure everything when you're small, because the measurements don't mean anything, and you're going to end up spending too much of your time measuring, not enough time doing business development. The second thing I'd say is, regardless of your size, it's important to use some form of PSA earlier rather than later. And I'm not just saying that I'm not getting any cash, unfortunately, at all from CMap. But I'm not just saying that because this is a CMap thing, but once firms are looking to sell, the requirements on about data from your buyer, or even from your bank that's arranging the merger or acquisition, are really, really demanding. And a lot of firms they think, oh, I'll leave the professional service automation tool until we've got 30, 40, 50 people. And by then it's a huge project, with a much higher chance of failure to implement it, because you're shifting systems and you're going to get a huge amount of resistance from your employees. And PSAs are generally pretty cheap because you can buy by the license. So try and do that type of stuff earlier rather than later. It'll get you into the good practice. Doesn't mean that you need to use all the metrics, but try and use it because it will save you time and money. And my own studies show that it's correlated to a higher exit value, a higher multiple, and even higher project margins. So that's the second thing to say. The third thing to say on KPIs is you need to distinguish between the input and the output KPIs. As far as I'm concerned, so I advise boutiques on growth towards exit. And as far as exit is concerned, there's around 12 major metrics that you're looking at, which I won't go into, well, I won't list them all, but you can imagine revenue, EBITDA, revenue growth, EBITDA growth, employee churn, average client contract longevity, and things like that. And they're the major output ones, but there's nothing you can do to change those other than changing the input metrics. So once a firm starts to get bigger, you need to distinguish between what's being reported at different levels. And the big output metrics, the EBITDA, the revenue growth, the clients, the pipeline, and all the rest of it, are going to be measured at the more strategic level. It's the leadership team that are going to be looking at those. Then you have a set of metrics at the management level, which might be around project, client profitability, sector profitability, utilization of specific consulting teams. And then you get down to the operational level. So you're starting to build a cadence, a hierarchy of reporting, and you also start to build a cadence. So there are some things that you're going to measure once a week, which will be things like, your sales, your pipeline, your resourcing. Then there are things you're going to be measuring monthly, which are things like your financial reporting, your budgets, your forecasts. Then there's going to be things that will be quarterly, your marketing reports perhaps, or your profit and loss reforecasting. And then there's a set of things that you do yearly, which are much more strategic around your competitors, the market, new services. So really what you see as firms start to grow beyond 30 up to 100 is you get different levels of reporting. And if you haven't got some type of system in place to manage that, you're going to end up with 50 spreadsheets. And when someone comes to buy you, you're going to spend your entire time going back to historical spreadsheets and trying to get all of this data together. It's much simpler simply to press a button and run a whole load of reports for your potential buyers and the banks who are managing the transaction.